Oh, busy.
Busy?
Keeps going.
Yeah. Play any video games?
Um, I have a 9-year-old, and we I wasn't a big gamer growing up, but I was big into the early SNES Final Fantasy things, and we just played those together.
Oh,
And then
nice.
she got a Nintendo Switch, and so she got like Final Fantasy 10. She's starting that out right now. So
Oh,
those
nice.
are the only things I really play.
Uh, I just got the new Dark Souls game, Elden Ring.
Oop, I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Nope,
Testing?
I cannot hear you at all for some reason. Hold on. It might be on my side. Hang on.
Testing, testing, one, two, three, four.
Hold on. I don't know why. Reset.
Hmm. Testing, testing, one, two, three, four. Testing, testing. Still nothing? Testing. I can't hear you now. Testing. Nope, can't hear you now. If can you hear me yet? Testing, testing, one, two, three, four. Can you hear me? Testing, testing. I can't hear you. Might also want to check the settings in Whereby in the top right to see if it has the right input selected. Still can't hear you. Nope, still can't hear you. In the settings in the top right, there should be, maybe it might just be, okay, that'll work. Hello, guys in the chat. Hello, Javier Jara. How are you? KCA Randy, Shane Somer. Everyone needs a smile. Adam, how's it going? Hi, Stefan. Does your guest know sign language? I do not know. He might. It's very possible he might know sign language. Hello, Fan. So I got Elden Ring. Been playing Elden Ring. Just been wandering around the map mostly. Potato. That is correct. Oh. Elden Ring is pretty easy so far. I haven't had any difficulty playing it at all yet. Favorite weapon type is a katana. It's always a katana. But I got the most powerful katana in the game, but I don't like it as much because it doesn't have the stabby stab. The stab is a good move. What build am I going for? I'm probably going to go for a Dex Mage. Dex Mage with 1400 HP. That's usually the type I go for. Adam was first, so he gets 5 billion Pine points, which he can then trade in at Pine Creek's YouTube channel. Definitely not going to inflate the Pine Creek currency. I hate the mount. I think the mount is so dumb. It's like a mule with horns. It's like, why would they give you such a silly mount that you can't like change to the cool horses? Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Hey, let's get it started before something else messes up here.
Yeah. So Barry, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. My name is Barry Lamb. I'm the producer and host of the Phi Nation podcast on Slate. We just finished our fifth season. It's kind of a narrative driven show, kind of like a public radio documentary type show that mixes in storytelling with philosophy. And my day job is I'm a philosophy professor at Vassar College.
So what got you into philosophy and bringing philosophy to people through stories?
Well, the second thing only happened really late. What got me into philosophy was college, really. When I went to college and I was a freshman, I took this kind of one of these great books courses. I went to UC Irvine, and that course was called Humanities Core. So it was like read the Odyssey, do the history of like nuclear warfare, pair that with some, you know, John Locke and some John Stuart Mill, all of these things in the Western and Eastern traditions. There was some stuff on Chinese literature too. And I found myself really drawn to the philosophical stuff. I found myself drawn to all of it actually. So when I got to sophomore year, I decided to take more courses in all of the humanities, and philosophy is the one that stuck because that was the one that I felt was most rigorous. There was like a good standard for good and bad. I doubled as an English major, and I was really good at it, but I kind of felt at the time that anything bad you did, you could kind of explain away. It was like you did a reading of a book and it sucked, but then you can like kind of like fiddle around and write something fancy, and then you get an A on it. But in philosophy, if you bullshitted, like the instructor would say, "Oh yeah, this is just bullshit," and I actually kind of like that about it. And so when it was time to finish college, I decided to apply to graduate schools in philosophy, which at the time were and still are really, really competitive. But I was lucky enough to get into the top programs. So at that point, it was like, okay, I got a really good opportunity here. For people out there who don't know, if you get into a really good PhD program, you basically get it paid for 5 years. You kind of have like a stipend, and you go to school for 5 years. And yeah, so I did that. I went to Princeton, got my PhD 0607. Right out of Princeton, I got my job here at Vassar, which is a really good, liberal arts college in the Northeast. So I got really lucky. And that was probably the first, third of my career in philosophy. And it wasn't until like way later, like probably 2015. So I got my job in '06, so like a good 9 years that I went through the academic hoops and did all the academic stuff that essentially I got bored and I got a little bit disillusioned with technical work in professionalized academia. So at the time I was very enamored, as a lot of people are my age, with kind of the narrative storytelling that you find on public radio, like This American Life and Radio Lab and Invisibilia. And sometimes some of those shows touched on some philosophical themes. Mostly you get things like science and brain science and psychology, and increasingly at the time, economics and stuff like that. And because my field of expertise wasn't that, but I also felt that there was something that philosophy could contribute. I thought there really should be a show like those shows for philosophy, and it didn't exist. And my understanding is I think I'm still the only one that exists, um, because it's so much work to do that. But the idea was a documentary, well produced, reported style of radio, of audio, of podcasting that mixes in nonfiction stories, like things that happen to people in the actual world, with that things that happen that have philosophical themes to it, and then I would like examine those philosophical themes with it's not just me. It's like I have people who work on that kind of stuff, and I feature them on every episode. So yeah, I just decided to start doing that in 2015, and luckily for me, it picked up steam pretty much right away, and got onto a network, and so I've been doing it ever since.
Awesome. You mentioned a few things there I was really interested by. You said you were disillusioned by the work in academia. What did you mean by that?
Um, when you get to a certain level, and I would say that graduate school is that level. What most people who are interested in philosophy become interested because number one, they're interested in big questions of the universe or life or knowledge or morality. And they are they like the way that you think about, like, philosophers think about those kinds of topics, and maybe they even are so excited about it they want to help spread that. Right? So most of the traditions in the humanities are just passed down, and you need people who are interested in stuff to pass it down, otherwise they'll just disappear. And by the time you get to graduate school, and you're kind of professionalizing to become an academic, that is, you're trying to get a job, you're trying to get promoted in a job, and you have to learn the the things that you have to do that. And the things you have to do that is to essentially find a field of expertise and drill down in that field to some corner that not a lot of people have said much about, and then carve out a niche in that corner, um, and say something in that corner that makes you be the person other people look to when they're interested in that little corner. I think that's a pretty accurate description of academia in general. It's the sciences. It's everything. If you study literature, you don't really study Shakespeare. Right? You study like a very, very specific corner of like something in literature. And that can be exciting, and I think some people really like that because you become like the go-to person to talk about stuff, and then you end up in communities of about 15 to 20 people in the country or in the world, and if you're lucky, 100 or 150 people in the country or in the world that understands your stuff, and you can talk to them about your stuff, and they are the ones who are engaging with your stuff and trying to argue against you, and then you try to argue against them, and you create a little literature, and that literature goes on the internet or goes into a library, and so on and so forth. That's really how things work, because the the um the currency, the thing that makes you move forward in academia is prestige. Right? So it's reputation. It's a reputation economy, and to develop a reputation, these are the things people look for. Uh, so you publish in these journals that nobody else reads, even if they wanted to, because they're behind paywalls and stuff, and paid a lot by libraries. They're not comprehensible. They're as comprehensible to the lay reader as a math paper is comprehensible.
As
It's not
Hegel,
comprehensible.
as Hegel
Yeah,
is comprehensible.
yeah. Hegel probably is even more comprehensible in many ways than some of the stuff that's published in analytic philosophy. And so it was that machinery that I got a little bored with, a little disillusioned with, and it's I don't want to, people sometimes, like, I've talked a lot about this, and some people think I'm shitting on them because like they like to work in that tradition, and I'm really not. I mean, I feel that way. I feel this way about philosophy the way I feel about the sciences. If there weren't somebody working on mRNA surface area such and such, we wouldn't have been able to get these vaccines, right? And so like in philosophy, I mean, who am I to say like that's less important or more important? But it's if there isn't somebody working on, you know common knowledge attributions amongst communities of blah blah, blah or whatever, like in philosophy, like like that's there wouldn't be any progress made, and I'm glad there are people doing that. What I'm saying is that I was disillusioned with it because a lot of the reasons I got into philosophy in the first place wasn't really that. Um, so, and I'm not alone in this. What I've discovered in the last few years is that it's shocking to me that there are people who have spent an entire career and are now retired who have expressed that and have felt that way for 30 years. And then there are like seniors in college where you're not even supposed to be anywhere near that who have come to me and said, "Why is it that the philosophy that I learned like senior year is nothing like what I got interested in the first place?" Right? So it's not like I mean, I guess one of the ways to think about it is um there is a class of people who are really into philosophy, got into it, and are still into it, but they're not particularly into the professionalized uh, publication, find a niche in a corner that you become the expert in aspect of philosophy. So, so I guess I was one of those, and that's what led me to do more public outreach type, public engagement type work.
Is that kind of like what you think it more of it should be, or more philosophy, academic philosophy should move towards? Is more like the public outreach kind of a thing, as a way to move away from this niche kind of going into some deep thing that no one understands?
I don't know if I think more people should be doing it. I think that the people who are good at it and want to do it should have space to do it, which is not to say that people should be moving towards that. With all due respect to a lot of my peers, a lot of them would be god awful at it, like just awful. And like if there was a push, if they're like, so this happened in Britain and in Australia too. Those schools are almost all publicly funded, right? Like government funded. And the government wrote into like your department's got to do something like this. There's got to be some component that it's like not just insular, but whatever. They call it an engagement component or something. And so like a lot of those departments kind of freaked out for good reason. Like it's not true that there are people who are good at it and that you want to do it. Like as soon as they do it, you'll be like, oh, it's kind of like when you have certain kinds of like brilliant scientists and then you put them on TV or something, you're just like, oh no, this is not good. Right.
Snooze fest.
That's what I mean. I feel the same way about humanities people, in particular philosophers. Some of them are really great, and at the public engaged stuff. And I'd like there to be room for them. So I'd like it so that those people, when they do it, can be what's the word, credited within their profession, within their like the system, within the machine, right? They don't only get credited for the niche stuff they do in a corner. So, like, here's a famous philosopher, like, educated PhD in philosophy, Cornell West, right? So Cornell West is great in that he like doesn't need it anymore, that kind of niche stuff. But there was a time, and this was I don't know, 15 years ago or something, or 20 years ago even, where there was a time when the president of Harvard sat him in his office and said, you got to stop doing this public outreach stuff, man. That stuff's not serious. And then like he just went, okay, I'm out. But that's because he's a celebrity in all kinds of other respects. I don't know if the field needs to push everyone to do it. I think what the field needs is that I think there's plenty of people who want to do it, and the field shouldn't push them out. Like I think that's the right way. That's the way that I think about it.
So, what do you think is the reason people? You said that college students, the reason they get into philosophy, is usually something completely different from where they end up or would try to end up as a professional philosopher. Do you think there's room in professional philosophy to have more opportunities to engage with those things that really get people engaged into the field in the first place?
Yeah, but they got to stop doing it the way that they've been doing it, because by the time you get super professionalized, a lot of it people try, but there's a limit to how much they can reach people, right? And I think I mean there's a lot of different reasons to diagnose it. Like one is like the arcane language that people use in writing stuff. That that turns people off.
The
And the
mereological
second,
nihilism, right?
yeah, yeah, and the other thing is, uh, I actually think there's a limit to how many people in the world are interested in logical puzzles and paradoxes. Like, I think there are a lot, but I don't think that there's that many, right? That you can make it sort of a mass thing. So in philosophy, then the tradition in which I was trained, which is the dominant tradition in the U.S. and Britain and the English-speaking countries, it's called analytic philosophy. Sort of the thing that people start out with almost all the time, the thing that gets people most fired up is the paradox. Like, here's a paradox, right? And then they present like a puzzle where it seems like there's a contradiction happening. And then they're like, oh, this is really, really interesting. And then like start talking about things, whether it's like a paradox about free will or a paradox about whether knowledge exists or something about, anything like that. Like, that's their starting point. And I think that's fascinating. It comes from like the Greek tradition, like in philosophy, the Greek tradition, people started with paradoxes and so forth. Uh, that's an example, I think, of people starting from a starting point that is already reducing their audience, right? The number of people who are going to be brought in. That's why on my show, I try to start with story rather than paradox, right? I try to start with um, I did a whole season on criminal justice, and instead of talking about the paradoxes of, that you find in criminal justice and then trying to solve them like a philosopher would, I start with like, okay, so there was this girl, she was rolling her suitcase through JFK, and unbeknownst to her, she had a boyfriend that stuffed, 10 kilos of cocaine into the railings on the suitcase. And she went to trial, and they were looking on the camera, and they were trying to figure out whether or not that's the face of somebody who could know that the cocaine was in there, or that was the face of someone who didn't know. And and then the judge, and she was convicted. And the judge, okay, so like it's like I just started telling like a story about something that happened to someone, and it turned out to be an episode about the justice of double punishment, right? Because what that story opened up was the way in which people are punished through jail time, and people are punished outside of jail for in all kinds of ways by having prohibitions on what they can do, like professions they can take up after they're convicted, where they can live, prohibitions on public housing. They can't get student loans anymore, things like that, right? And what do you do? Like, is are those kinds of double punishments justified? Are they even punishments? Is like a philosophical question. And the way that philosophers would raise it is just to raise it as a question and then try to answer it. And I think some people are really into that, but other people need to be brought in by the voice of somebody who's really impacted by, answering that question one way or another way. And that's how I approach it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that people are more motivated by stories, and that's why we see religion having such a huge impact in the world. Stories is a lot more relatable to people and how they can get more emotionally engaged rather than just being given some kind of philosophical quandary. What do you think are the most important contributions of philosophy, in your opinion?
The most important contributions. Oh my God. Gosh, you have to yeah, I could only answer that by time scale, right? So there's like of all time, of the 20th century. Um,
My
of
answer
all
is
yeah.
the distinctions. I'm a big fan of the distinctions. The noumena phenomena, a priori, posteriori, manifest, scientific image. I think that those distinctions are what really got me engaged in philosophy, and I found use for them in my conversation. So I would say that is probably the most important distinction I found.
Yeah, distinction. I mean, like you're talking like an analytic philosopher, right?
Yeah.
Like an analytic philosopher, like the best discovery you can make is a distinction that people hadn't thought of before. And then once they realize the distinction, suddenly they can think clearer. Like before, there was like, I was completely muddled. I had no idea that I was actually conflating two things, right? And so you have that mind, right? And like really 20th century British and American and Australian, like Anglo philosophy, the kind that I was raised in and I teach. That is the thing, right? It was like before we had this distinction, we were totally confused. But now that we have this distinction, we really know that uh, the, this philosophical question goes away, this other philosophical question can be answered, and so forth. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true of a lot of things. It took Western philosophy over 2,000 years to start doing that kind of thing, right? And then there, and with the distinctions, there's a lot of um, gosh, what's the right way? Like misses, right? So like you could have like a lot of people like making 20 distinctions, and it turns out like none of them are all that important, but that's because they are trying really hard to think through something. But the ones that you described are definitely like within the 20th century. I think there's just um uh the distinction between um like Kripke's distinctions between metaphysical and epistemic, modality between priori, a posterior, necessity, and contingency. Most definitely was one of the biggest contributions to 20th century philosophy. I would say that if you look about earlier in the 20th century, the idea that you can have logical analysis of certain terms. So, the idea that language can be truth functional, though that's a really important development that allowed for the origins of programming languages and to think of that really allows us to be in the age of computing. Um, the fact that you can model languages and mathematically, I think, is a really important advanced in the 20th century. As long as we're on the 20th century, if we talk about philosophy going back to Plato, I think one of the biggest advances. I mean, this is Plato's biggest advance, um, and people have been fighting it ever since. Is that there are bits of language that you use to talk about abstractions, right? So like what Plato was was you know the philosopher who first thought seriously about the difference between you know uh, this is a good sandwich and goodness. Goodness is a what? Is a what? It's a noun. You can use it. I mean, the ancient Greek language developed at exactly this time where you could make into nouns just other things, and that created abstract categories, right? And then Plato was the first to think about how should we think about the reality of these abstract categories, and he had a theory about that, but we're still in that, right? We're still in the notion of what is the relationship between language and the world. Like, do abstract categories refer to things that are just as real as concrete words? I that was a big advance, I
So a
think.
big fan of platonic objects.
I don't know if I'm a big fan of platonic objects. I might not be. I don't. I'm not sure. But I do think that it's a really big advance in Western philosophy that Plato pointed gave us a theory like that, so that we can think very seriously about whether every noun category in a language has to have something that is a person, place, or thing that it refers to. I mean, he put that explicitly. Other traditions talk about this kind of stuff, but I think on your program you are really interested in theology and things like that, right? And like if you are concerned with existence in theology, you're really thinking about um, whether certain coherent stories have references, right? Like in reality. And I like the way that I think Plato set up the problem in a way that allowed people to think about it in a certain way for 2,000 years. So I mean, there's that. Like that's a big advance.
What are some of the advances that have been found in Eastern philosophy? Because very few people talk about those as much as compared to the Western ones.
Oh wow! So my knowledge of Eastern philosophy is very impoverished. But so I have a colleague in this department who you should probably get on your channel. He knows a hell of a lot. Brian Van Noorden. He's like easily, you can find him easily. Um, I think that in Eastern I think well, let's talk about Chinese because like there's a lot. There's like Indian, which I know even less about. Um, in Chinese philosophy, I think there were really major advances in um, theories about the relationship between individuals, communities, and the state that took uh, you know thousands more years before the West started thinking about it in the liberal political philosophy tradition that goes to back to, just that goes to the Enlightenment. A lot of that kind of stuff was discussed in China out of out of necessity, right? It was one of the first civilizations that had to hold itself together at a large scale in a way that Europe had all of these little fiefdoms and kingdoms, and that was okay for thousands, hundreds and hundreds of years. But in China, there was very early on that there was this idea that you have to have some kind of hierarchical system that governs a lot of different regions, and essentially, we're talking about a federal state, right? And so there was a lot of advancements that we would today in the West named, differences in how to think about this, what the way that states should be. So, for instance, there were a lot of advances in thinking about how legalistic a system should be, right? So, like in our country, there's talk about like we're a really litigious country in the US, right? So like there's a lot of laws and there's a lot of lawsuits and things like that. A lot of that kind of stuff was ex- was thought about very thoroughly in the ancient Chinese tradition, like you know um, how much a society should be law governed versus governed by individual people. That was a big dispute early on. Like is the point to get wise and knowledgeable governors, or is the point that no, you just like imagine, just assume everybody's mediocre and just write out as many laws and rules as possible so that even the most mediocre person can run a government like that this kind of stuff was a major part of ancient Chinese thought in a way that you know predated a lot of the liberal tradition. So I would say something like that, but that's what the limits of my knowledge of it really.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think that that would be a useful way to try and analyze American politics and like the tax system to try and get it to be less than like 10 million different lines of code?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, there's a sense in which the American system, in some aspects of it, really has followed that like legalistic tradition. The idea is, like I mean, there really is truly an American presumption that the people who are going to be governing you are not only just mediocre, but like bad, and like they're going to be corrupt, and they're going to be power hungry, and they're going to be tyrants. And so the job is to like write out, yeah, like you said, 10,000 lines of code so that even an idiot can do it. And that's why that's why that's what you get paperwork bureaucracy and red tape and stuff.
Yeah. What are your most favorite stories that you've gone through on your channel? The ones that you think are the most impactful or emotionally connecting for people?
Right, right. So I'm going to go back to the first season of Hi-Fi Nation. Um, I would say the story of Larisha Hawkins, who was the professor who was fired at Wheaton College for saying that Christians and Muslims worship the same God. She gave this was like 2015 or something. I featured her story on the first season. Um, she that it was an evangelical college, and this was sort of the early signs that there was going to be a break in evangelicalism because of its intolerance of people who are genuinely de- devout Christians who just want to be a little bit more inclusive in their Christianity. And she was fired for it. And her story and the story of Michael Mangus, who was a colleague of hers, who was also let go for supporting her. That story, still sticks with me because they really made very positive outreach to the Muslim community, both in this country and abroad, in with that story. And it fit with the philosophy so well, which is the philosophy of when do two people with two different stories are actually talking about the same thing, right? And it's not even a it's a question that even if you're an atheist, you can think is an interesting question, right? Like you might not believe anything about the Christian God or the Muslim God, but you might think, oh, but it's an interesting question whether it's the same God, even if it's just a fictional story on both sides, right? And that's really what the question was, and that question has a very interesting both theological and philosophical roots. That story still sticks out with me.
What happened in
Um,
that story? Because that seems, from my experience in the debating community, most Muslims and atheists usually agree. Yeah, it's the Abrahamic God. Is it all? They're all
yeah,
Abrahamic gods. So what was the controversy there? I don't understand why she would be fired for saying that. It seems rather benign.
because it is not doctrine. It is not doctrine in any of the Christian traditions that Christians and Muslims worship the same God. Um, Even though it's doctrine in the Catholic tradition that Christians and Jews worship the same God. So because it's not doctrine, the dispute is whether or not the differences in doctrine concerning Jesus are sufficient to make it so that the God um, of Islam is not the God of Christians. So, for instance, it's essential feature to the in the Christian tradition that Jesus is God, right? And it's most certainly not. I mean, there's a denial of that in Islam, and so they have the same Abrahamic prophetic tradition, but they deny this one key feature. And so there's this question: if you deny that one key feature, is that sufficient for you to be talking about different god, or you're talking about different gods now? You have different objects of thinking, and that's an open question actually. I don't think it's settled in philosophy. I think if you ask most philosophers, they probably say no. That's probably not enough. Um, but but I think it's an open question, and it's a difficult question, and it's so difficult, in fact, that the institution that fired her, out of after a lot of outcry from both alums and students, said, "Okay, we're gonna like officially write out a document that says what our doctrine is that you have to accept, and we're gonna answer this question." And they had no idea what the hell they were getting themselves into, because the Catholic Church with its thousands of theologians over the course of 30 years couldn't answer that question, and says we're not going to answer that question. So to think that this evangelical college with a bunch of administrators are going to sit around and saying we're going to sign on, because if you answer it either way, you're in trouble with various, like if they say no and they give some reasons, those reasons are enough to preclude the Jewish God from being the same as the Christian God. And you're fucked if you're Christian and you say that. Like you really are. Right. So they didn't realize what the quandary that they were setting themselves right into. And if they say that, yes, that is the same Christian, then they completely unjustly like let go two of people in their community. So like either way, if you take a stance, you're screwed. And so, but they didn't realize it. They just thought, oh yeah, we're just gonna do it one way or the other. And they weren't in a position to. It's a very difficult technical question. It's not like a question that I think a lot of evangelicals run into this problem, is they think that they can answer theological questions by like looking in their own hearts or whatever that means. And it's like, no, that's not how theology works. Theology does not work by like investigating yourself. Like that's not, like there's nothing in Christianity that says that you're going to answer questions about the Trinity by investigating like yourself and what you think about it. Like that makes no sense.
But it's God speaking through me. It's
Yeah, no,
infallible.
exactly. Like you think a little bit longer about what the Trinity consists in. It's like if you take that seriously, you're gonna have to like learn some logic or something, right? You can't just like reflect on yourself and think, oh, I think I figured out the Trinity, whatever that, right? So, anyways,
Have you seen that a lot?
that's the story. Yeah.
Have you seen that a lot in philosophy where there's because there's accused academia is often accused of being very selective in the things they allow, and that they discriminate against creationists or whoever. And this would be an example where I think that is a valid criticism. Do you see a lot of this kind of discrimination against certain ideas prior to actually having some really strict formulated critique?
There's a little bit of it. Some of it's not discriminatory. Like I would say for creationists, I wouldn't say that that's discriminatory. The like that's not the right word because you know 100 years ago and then 80 years ago and then 40 years ago, there was very serious academic examinations of the claims of creationism, both in geology and philosophy of science and like the biological sciences. And and it was pretty decisively refuted on like pretty sound scientific grounds. Like if you're going to play the scientific game, the game really is like what are the testable hypotheses and like what are the things that you're comparing it to and what is the data like that kind of stuff. You could not play that game, but if you're going to play that game as the academy does, then you know like so I would say for creationists, I wouldn't say it's discriminatory. I would say that it's been it's been examined and it's been refuted. And the same is true. I mean, it's not just theology, right? I mean, like in the 20s, psychic phenomena was a major, that's another story from the first season. Like, it was a major area of psychological, philosophical, and scientific research. So much so that I discovered that in many major universities, they still have a $1 million endowed chair for a professor of psychic phenomena because it was given by some millionaire in like the 30s or something, right? But they haven't filled that role because it's like nobody studies that stuff. Like I wouldn't say it's discriminating against, the study of psychic phenomena. It's like there was a study of psychic phenomena. There was nothing there. So it's not discriminatory. Is it true that there might be discrimination against other things in the academy that that are not taken seriously as hypotheses for ideological reasons or reasons of bias rather than reasons of um, you know rather than scientific reasons? Absolutely, that's got to be true, right? Like I would be shocked if there was no such thing, because that's the way the intellectual tradition has always happened. There's always been an entrenched establishment, and good and bad, right? Bad is entrenched establishments like the church, right? But then also good entrenched establishments like um, Newtonian physics that like refuse to accept certain other things that took 20th century revolutions from people from the outside and so forth. Yes, absolutely. I think that that's got to be the case. And the interesting question is not like we don't know what those are. Like by definition, they're out there. We don't know what they are. But I would be shocked if there was no such thing.
Yeah, a big example that is often accused is political bias. A lot of political topics seem to be could be good candidates for what might be examples of that. So like one of
Yeah,
the
I
big ones
think.
is the Leah Thomas thing where she won Penn State won the women's NCAA gold as a trans person. And that seems like a very legitimate question to ask if that should be allowed or not. And it's something that I've seen a lot of pushback against anybody even asking the question, even in the academic sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true in social media. I think it's true that people aren't asking. I mean, there's pushback to asking that question in social media, and probably that's true that there's pushback for asking that question in many areas of academia also. But I will also say that the views expressing that that's not a good thing are pretty well known in academia too. So like the people who do ask that question and say no, it shouldn't be allowed, and these issues in of trans women in women's sports is an issue that people have thought about since the 70s. And it's not like they're missing and not like those good arguments are being squashed. You can find them and you can read them. They're there. So whether or not the fact that they're there, but in social media and the internet, people say, "Oh, that's all bullshit and whatever. We shouldn't read them." Whether that counts as squashing it, I'm not so sure. But it's true that it's true that, but like it's there. Like the stuff about trans women and women's sports is that dates back at least to the 70s, right? Uh, in women's tennis, and you know, the issues haven't changed that much. So a lot of those views have been out there, and you can find them in the journals. If you had to teach a class on pro and con, you wouldn't be like, I have no, there's no con argument that we can find. Like that's not true. Like it's there. So like I don't. That's not saying there's no bias. I'm just saying they're there.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Is there any stories that you found most challenging in your podcast?
probably that one. I did a two-parter on that question, because I was, but I was, I didn't do it in a very ideological way. Very challenging. Yeah, um, gosh, I've done episodes on the ethics of killing in war. I've done episodes on very weird things, like I talked to a woman who claimed to be the reincarnation of Anne Frank. And I've talked to a guy who goes hunting for dinosaurs because he's a young earth creationist, and he wants to capture a live pterodactyl to bring it back to a zoo that he's opening up in New Hampshire.
That'd be
um
great evidence. It'd be
yeah, yeah,
phenomenal.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, exactly. And those are all fun. um I'm not a, I'm doing this show turned me off to the hot button social justice topics. Even when I did a whole season on criminal justice and philosophy, there wasn't a lot of the social justice stuff in it. And the reason why is because I don't think I'm particularly good at it. And I don't think people who aren't good at it should do stories like that. Um, so I focused on philosophical issues in the law that I was interested in, like double punishment, like mens rea, which is how much should mental states of people performing criminal acts should be written into the law. Um, those kinds of questions. So I would say that I find most challenging the stuff that probably what a lot of the internet seems to be talking most about, which are the more hot button identity politics type stuff. And by disposition, I'm generally averse to those kinds of topics.
You said you're averse because you're not good at it. What do you mean by not good at it?
I don't find very good stories that are like particularly compelling, and uh, I don't connect them to the philosophical issues as well as the other people, right? Because like the kind of philosophical issues that I find interesting are not the ones that I think are like here. Let me give you an example, right? So, um, a lot of people think that it's really easy to do a philosophy show in the following way. Um, any crazy thing you find in the world, you can just ask the question, is that right or wrong, good or bad? And there's your philosophy show. My mind doesn't go there. My mind generally is like, is this like when I find a story, like let me give you an example. I did a story on uh, sorry, solitary confinement. And I followed a guy who was in solitary for 8 years and so forth. And my mind, when I do a show like that, doesn't go immediately to, is solitary confinement good or bad, right? So, or for instance, if I did a story about transgender women in women's sports, like my mind is not, well, the interesting thing is that good or bad or right or wrong, right? My mind is immediately going to other philosophical topics. Like, so for the solitary confinement thing, it was about why is it that that kind of punishment isn't something that has judicial review or something a judge does? Why is it that solitary confinement or the severity of a punishment is determined at the discretion of the Department of Corrections, which is just like the State Department, like that has somebody who just signs a form, right? Whether and they decide like what like and like why. So like for me, the more interesting question was like, why is it that some things are um publicly reviewed and a judge gets to do it, and other things are like just some bureaucrat who can just make up their mind and make somebody's life miserable for 8 to 13 years. Does that make sense what I'm trying to do?
Yeah,
Say
yeah,
like that?
absolutely. That goes back to our
Yeah.
previous conversation about how the Chinese and the Eastern philosophy were
Yeah.
trying to talk about should we just make a bunch of laws and assume the person in power is terrible,
Yeah.
or give them some rights, like we have a good
Yeah.
person and they have the right to make a decision here.
Yeah. So when I say I'm not good at the social or identity politics, right? I feel like the people who are good at that stuff, who get attention, who all the people like want to like yell at or want to like support or whatever, are the people whose mind immediately goes to something happened. I think it's good here. Something happened. I think it's bad here, and they get a lot of attention, right? And my mind is always go to something happened. Okay, let's not ask whether it's good or bad. Like there's this other thing which is interesting, isn't it? Blah blah blah. Right? Does that make sense? What I'm trying to
Oh
say?
yeah,
And,
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah,
Because
and I think
people are
yeah,
really attached to the good and bad and the right and wrong, and it's something that people are really emotionally engaged by, and so they get a lot more attention to that rather than the more technical questions of like, what is the back end methodology that led to this problem? Which
that's
I
right.
think it's equally as important. Both of those questions are equally as important, but one is just more people are attracted to it because of emotional reasons.
That's right. And so I've so for me, when I did a two-part on trans women and women's spaces, it was a real struggle. And I turned out not to be like, is it good or bad? It was just like, what's the history of this? Like this happened in the 70s, and then this is the these are the views going on now, and here are the various theories of gender that are involved in like the sides of this, and like thinking of gender as this kind of phenomena versus that kind of phenomena, and then boom, that's it. I didn't have like a good or bad advocacy, and you could call that a flaw or a strength. It's just how I think. And so when I say I'm bad at it, I was like, okay, that's not going to get as much attention as Joe Rogan saying something, or ContraPoint saying something, because they are speaking to what the rest of the world seems to care a little bit more about, which is it's good or it's bad.
Yeah, I think I see that as more of a flaw in human nature. Like the difference between the BBC versus Fox News and NBC is the same kind of a distinction where they say the news that gets all the attention are the ones that hear all the terrible things in the world and it gets people to like really click and view, and the ones that are like the impartial ones like the early BBC who are just presenting the facts and let the viewer decide kind of lost interest for most people because it wasn't as emotionally polarizing.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe I don't like to be emotionally polarizing. I like my show to be emotionally engaging though. Like I design it that way. There's the show was sound designed and it's soundtracked and it's edited in such a way as to highlight the emotional arc of particular stories. I'm really influenced by This American Life in that respect. But it's not emotionally polarizing. It's trying to hit on universal features of sympathy and empathy in human beings. So I guess that's a major difference.
Are there any topics that you'd really like to cover that you haven't covered yet on your podcast?
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of medical stuff, and I'd like to do that. Um, uh, there are certain things in technology that I'd like to cover that I haven't been able to cover yet. Um, the thing that hits close to me personally a lot, I'm really interested in issues of wealth. I'm really interested in the issues of what rich people do with their money, actually. I find that endlessly fascinating, because it's so weird. Um, and like, so those three categories, I'd say.
Oh yeah, have you done a lot of economics, socialism versus capitalism stuff?
I haven't done socialism versus capitalism. The very first episode was about what dead people do with their money, right? And how much of the society is structured around allowing dead people to control what happens to their wealth after they've died. That's not a capitalism or socialism thing. In fact, if anything, I tried to present it as, look, even if you're a libertarian, this is pretty fucked up. It doesn't make any sense at all. Um, but I haven't done a lot of that kind of stuff. Uh, Not yet.
So what is the medical stuff that you were interested in?
Um, Yeah, medical ethics is very interesting. More recently, I've been thinking a lot about the idea of advanced directives. So when somebody say, forget about in the limiting case when people are dying, but let's say somebody with bipolar decides when they're not in a manic state to um, issue a directive to a doctor to force their manic future self into treatment or in addiction. And now a doctor is faced with somebody who's now in a manic state or in the throes of a relapse who says, "Nah, I don't want that." Right? And forced treatment is a very serious thing. Like we don't do that anymore. It used to be like this thing that we did, and it was grossly inhumane. And, but now you have the former self, who is a slightly different self, who issued a directive that the doctor has to do this, or your family member, or your friend. You know, this happens a lot in addiction, right? Like your friend says, like, do this, and like throw me into rehab, but then now they've relapsed and say, no, 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 I changed my mind. So that's a question that I'm interested in, right? Like, how do practitioners manage that kind of stuff? Because I know for a fact that in the law, those aren't binding legally, right? So you couldn't like hold it against your doctor if they decide not to follow your directions of your former self, right? Or either way. So that's one question that I'm interested in. That kind of stuff. I'm interested in intellectual property. I think that's a fascinating and beguiling concept that people have, that they think that they own ideas, and that's a medical context too.
Oh, and for 125 years, they own it for longer than their lifespan.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, that's just an endless fascinating thing. It's all part of the same theme, I think, that I have this interest in um, uh, a kind of decision making where you make decisions on behalf of the future right now, and then everybody else has got to follow it, right? Like for wealth, for like your own decision, and then like intellectual property. Like I came up with this, so like everybody has to be beholden to what I think now for 125 years, right?
Yeah, yeah, I find that also really fascinating because, in my view of morality, it's based on consent. And so, like the example you given with bipolar, what if you restrict your own rights for the future? Does your future self still morally obligated to oblige those previous self decisions? Like, say, I wanted to uh, consign myself to slavery or something for 100 years, and then 50 years, I'm like, I don't really like this. I want to stop.
That's exactly right.
So yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
an awesome question,
yeah,
and morally dubious. Like, what should you do in that case?
exactly. Yeah, cool
Have you
stuff.
have you done anything in AIs?
No, not yet. No, not yet. It's like those are all things that, the sky's the limit. Philosophy connects with so many things.
Yeah. Well, we've been going for about an hour. I really appreciate you coming on. Really enjoyed chatting with you. Do you want to give people a shout out to your podcast so people can find you?
Sure. Hi-Fi Nation is on all of your podcatchers. HIPHI Nation. It's a show on Slate. We just finished our fifth season. That fifth season began with a four-part series on the life and works of the philosopher David Lewis. In that season, we talk about all kinds of things, other things like the ethics of genetic modification. We talk about kidney donors. And we have a three-part series on monsters, so vampires and culture and philosophy, and
Cannibals. I
zombies
saw
and
the cannibal one.
yeah, and cannibals and so forth. But that's only the fifth season. There's four seasons. There's about 10 episodes per season. So go to the back catalog, listen to it. You're gonna really like it. It's an entertaining show.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I will talk to you later. You can just close the
All right.
screen. I'm going to go into the after show with a chat with my chat. So
All right. See you, Tom.
see you later. All right, guys. After show time. Put a link in the chat, the YouTube chat. That needs to be down. After show chat. Philosophy is stupid, Trevin, right? I partially agree with that. Maybe even majority agree with that. All right. Link in pin message. And there we go. So now the link should be in the link you think. Is it working? It's not working. Discord. Jump. Control C. V. There we go. That one worked. Next pin message. There we go. Now it worked. All right. At everyone after show time. There you go. All right. So how are you guys doing in the chat? Philosophy means the love of wisdom. Yes. The definition. As long as you make philosophy less stupid, Big Daddy. Hello, tree. How is it going?
It's going all right. How's it going for you?
Pretty good. Got what's it? Elden Ring. Been playing Elden Ring.
Yeah, I don't really play video games, so I don't know what that is.
That sounds boring.
I prefer to write most of the time. I don't know.
What kind of stuff do you write?
I usually just whatever comes to mind.
Like a journal or like sci-fi books?
I mean, both, I guess. Poetry too, short stories, I don't know. Like I said, whatever.
Gotcha. Hey Giz and other guys in the chat.
Howdy.
Kale.
Um,
Not a
give me
vegetable.
I like to think of it as a superfood.
Superfood. I like that what's it? The kinds of foods who were said to be like negative calorie foods, that if you ate them and you consume more calories than you actually, or you burn more calories than you consumed.
oh, like celery.
Yeah, it's false. It's not actually true, which is hilarious. There's only one food like that. It's called water.
Water.
Well, to be fair, celery is mostly water.
Wow, nobody's online right now. Have to go to like the politics server or something, get some spicy religious conversation.
You're just gonna start some shit.
Yep. That's well, I mean, just the entire politics server is just some shit in some way.
That's fucking hilarious.
So just, do I think philosophy will ever achieve anything? Trevin Wright. Yes. I think philosophy will take the lead in morality and create models of morality for society.
You guys want to hear something I've been working on? Writing.
Sure, why not?
It's not very long, so it shouldn't take long.
Right after that, hey, TJump, right after that, would you care to kind of, because morality is something I kind of am very unfamiliar with philosophically, would you kind of go into your morality after I'm a tree?
Sure, why not?
Hold on, let me just get it up here to read. Uh, sorry, this might take a second.
All right. So my morality is based on the idea of the best of all possible worlds. What would the best of all possible worlds look like, and if what would the morality in that world be? And I think that that world, if we could like make it, would be a world where it would be impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing. That would be my objective morality. In an objectively perfect world where it's physically impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing. And I think that that is the correct morality, both from a top down and a bottom up perspective. So top down meaning I think it's like ontologically a fact of the matter, and bottom up I think like if we had to design a morality, imagine there was no objective morality and we had to like create one and make it into the universe or something. I think this would be the best one to make into the universe to apply to artificial intelligences and would answer accurately moral questions in the past and future.
Tom, which scientific empirical field do you think will help philosophy kind of hone in on morality?
Physics. I think physics is everything. There's nothing other than physics.
Anything more specific?
Yeah, I think morality is just going to be a higher order emergent property, just like any other higher order emergent property in physics. But like we
What was
discovered
the
time, we thought time was a philosophical concept, and we discovered it was a physical concept. I think we think of morality as a philosophical concept, and we're going to discover it's a physical concept.
what was the name of that school of morality again? TJump, I caught you like 30 seconds after you had started.
The name?
Yes.
Well, mine is mine, so it's not like anybody else who subscribes to it, but it's a kind of moral naturalism, I guess.
Okay, thank
Alright, I found the thingy-majig.
Sure, go for
If
it.
you guys still want to hear it, I mean, I don't want to just like spat it off if a million people in here don't want to hear
Go for it. It doesn't matter.
it. Okay, so it's called Grim Days, a collection of short stories. It's sort of kind of about, I don't know, like the Grim Reaper and death and dealing with stuff like that. It's an interesting concept that I wrote about last night. I've got one story in it so far, so here goes. Um, do I love my job? No, of course not. However, I do understand there must be someone to do it, seeing as no one has chosen to step up and take my place, nor will they ever. It seems that I am fated to withhold the forces of life on my own and bear the tolls that come with it, the price that comes from every falter and the consequences that come from every mistake I choose to make. It's a difficult job that I would never wish on anyone, though it has brought to me more wisdom and knowledge than I could ever share. It's rather grim in this way, you see. Brings me down even on the best day of it, and yet what sticks always does enlighten me to continue on. You may call me whatever you like, for there is no need to get to know me just yet. For now, I am but your humble narrator, sharing with you tales of both hope and despair so that you may be enlightened as well. These tales may be gruesome, or they may be sorrowful enough to leave a gloomy feeling about you for quite some time, but please do not shy away. I do promise that we shall both come out of this with a better understanding of the importance of what it means to truly live. Now, there is little time to waste. I am on, I am on a tight schedule after all, so I must get to it. Let this not discourage you, however, and please do take your time to soak in the value of the stories that I share. Our first story takes place in a small village, long enough ago that even I can hardly remember its name. In the village, on the furthest outskirts of town, up atop an almost sad-looking hill, with faded grass and despairing trees, there stood an old wooden house. I remember the house fondly in the way that it swayed whenever the wind would blow, and the wooden boards, so roughly put together, often creaked with each sway. It was a type of eerie creaking one could almost find melodic, though I'm sure the other villagers did complain, up in the beds late at night, awoken from deep slumber due to it. The man who lived in this home, longer than I could tell you, gave the whistles of it no mind. He grew used to them over the years, and never had he taken the time to become irate by them. They were simply a way of life, and provided an escape from the monotony of the life he did lead. Of course, this particular man, one might say, had no life at all, for though try as he might, his legs seemed to fail him, as they had since he was young. Due to this ailment of his, the man lived life confined to his bed, cared for by a loving daughter by the name of Darla. His darling Darla, as it were, was content with her life also, and drew happiness from the fact that every day she was able to help her poor father. She'd cook for him, wash his clothes, and clean their home. In return, he'd share stories of when he was younger, would sing to her, put on a smile happier than any she had ever seen. Here he was, a father with no wife to speak of, confined to bed with only a single daughter to keep him company, and yet he saw that his life was good and beamed with great joy. As I can recall, the daughter herself had no one but her father also, despite having freedom to travel as she might, and being encouraged by the old man to do so. She never wavered in her duties. She, of her own accord, chose only to go into the village to buy food, and never left her father unattended for long. The worry that welled up in her every time she was away, and the fears that crossed her mind, kept her close to home. Her father, of course, being the cheery old man that he was, would insist that she find herself a husband, care for her as she had cared for him all these years. She never could bring herself to even consider this. It was as ridiculous to her as believing that one day her father would be able to spring from bed and dance merrily with her and proclaim that his daughter had been wedded at last. It simply was not going to happen. For years they lived their quiet lives, finding company in one another, though each grew more weary by the day. Until one day, while traveling into the village, Charlotte found that like her father's, her legs began to fail her. Though they ached with every step, she kept her composure about her and tried with all her might that she could muster to continue on. The old man was none the wiser to this, and carried on with his stories and singing once his daughter had returned. It made the pain to her worth it, though it didn't stop the ailment from progressing. Within the next few months, again, while traveling into town, Darla found that her legs were stone. They felt nothing and were unmoving, no matter how hard she tried to move them. In her despair, she laid in the grass, having crawled there from the path to get out of the way of the passive spy, and wondered to herself if this was what her father felt daily, wondering if this pit of despair and pain that she felt deep in herself had lied with her father all his life. Had his smiles been only lies as hers had been over the past few months? I can tell you that no smile the man had showed was ever fake. The love that he felt over the fact that he meant so much to someone as to be their whole life, to be taken care of by them when they could build a life of their own, brought more joy to him than he could ever have expressed. I remember visiting the man and discussing this with him when his daughter found that she was not able to return soon enough. The sound the door made as I knocked on it made the house seem almost hollow. The paint on the wood was chipped away and the door was old and pretty, but the knocker seemed brand new. It showed the true loneliness of this home that not once had it been knocked on by any villager in the many years that it stood there. Of course, I couldn't wait at the door forever or stay outside surrounded by my gloom. So I let myself in, ready to introduce myself. Over the bed stood a vibrant figure, looking down upon an old and withered form. Both held smiles on their faces with glee that rivaled a sunny day and brightened up the room. They looked into each other's eyes, one filled with new life, and the other staring back with none. Both were the old man. Yes, he had died with complications that, at this time, were unavoidable and almost inconceivable for even the brightest. However, though it seemed his heart had given out, the old man, in much younger form now, beamed love. His eyes held understanding that he would never again see his beloved daughter, though they also showed joy that she may be free of the home that she had trapped herself in for so long. When he looked at me, I gave a slight, sad smile, and he ran to hold my hand, whistling a song that was sweet and melodic, like the creaks of his house had been. He told me that he was ready to go, whether it was that he would end, wherever it was that he would end up. I assured him, as tears began to form in his eyes, that Darla would be okay. It was many more years before I met with Darla again. He had caught the attention of a young traveler the day she had collapsed upon the road, after discovering that her father had unfortunately passed, and learning of the pains and ailments that the woman had to go through. The man took it upon himself to help, rather than live a life confined to a bed, as her father had. Darla overcame the ailment that attempted to overtake them both. She learned to walk more with many years of practice and became married to the kind man who'd helped. When it was finally her time, though, she lived m- most of her life attending to her father. She longed to see him once again. This day was one of the more favorable ones, as I united a father once more with his daughter, both able to walk together for the first time, whistling the beautiful melody they have both come to know. And that's what I have so far.
Cool.
Coolio.
Simon, how's it going? Mind Wanderer. Most abs Erd. Most abs. The most abs. Like a 37 pack.
My connection's breaking up. I can't hear you.
Yes, you are very breaking up in range noises.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm gonna go make myself some lunch. I'm starving.
All right, see you later.
See ya.
Anybody else got any interesting to say? Anything going on?
Sadly, not so much here. Just a normal work day.
All right. All right, I'm going to sign off. Talk to you guys later.
Have a
Peace
great
out.
day.